Alright, so the crux of this talk, I really want you to, if you get nothing else, okay, I hope you got the sleep apnea part, please get that looked at. If you know that you snore or you know that your loved one snores and they're gaining weight, get a sleep study. We do our sleep studies at home. You take a kit home from us, we get the results the next day. It's not painful like it used to be, and the treatment for it is pretty good. We can get into that possibly in our next talk. What I really want to get to now is the sugar part. So we call this the evil food guide pyramid, and this is what our government gave us back in 1980 to advise us as to how to eat healthy. And I remember very well being in 8th grade when I first saw it, and I went home from school and I tried to follow the food guide pyramid that day, and maybe for a week. The thing on the pyramid that I really liked seeing was bread, because at that time in my life I loved bread. And so I specifically remember going home from school and trying to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread that evening after school, because that's what the food guide pyramid told me to do. Think about that. 8th grader trying to get 6 pieces of bread into her. I think I made it to 4 that night, and I was pretty much done. I counted the Pop-Tart I had for breakfast and some other thing, and I figured I was pretty good. I was doing what the government told me to do. But unfortunately, what the government told us to do led to eating practices and marketing styles that have precipitated, an unprecedented obesity epidemic. As you can see on this chart, back in 1960, about 12% of Americans were considered obese. By 1980, that number increased by 3% to 15%. 15% of Americans were obese in 1980. And by 2000, that number had more than doubled to 32%. Now this is overall. Certain populations, of course, it's much higher. And the obesity rate has since then been climbing ever since. And at this point, I think it's an elephant in the room that none of us can see, and we can't figure out how we ever got into this mess, when really the culprit has always been sugar. Because what the food guide pyramid did to our food, we kind of just dumbed it down, and what we got from it was fat is the devil, and so fat was taken out of our foods. Food without fat is not very palatable. And if you can remember, if you're old enough to remember what low-fat yogurt tasted like the first time you tried it in the 80s, then you remember why they had to amend those products right away. And little by little, there were lots of new and improved products. These products typically, I haven't shown you this tree I'm walking underneath. Sorry, helicopter. That's called a banyan tree. Little by little, they added sugar to the food, the yogurt, the skim milk. When you skim off all the fat, you are left with a higher ratio of sugar in the milk. And none of this stuff tasted very good. Let me walk this direction. And so little by little, they added sugar to the foods to make it tastier. And as they did that, we, as consumers, ran back to these products, convinced that our government was on our side and telling us the right things, and that by buying the low-fat yogurt, we would get skinnier. Unfortunately, just the opposite has occurred, as I mentioned. And I think, popularly, we're drifting away from this low-fat idea, but unfortunately, obesity rates continue to climb. They're not declining. In fact, the only major decline we've seen was when Michelle Obama was in the White House and introduced some food practices in which we saw a significant dip. But as you may recall, she was then told not to do that, and obesity rates went right back up. Regardless of what you think politically or not, without question, Americans are eating way more sugar than we used to be. In 1915 or so, we estimate that we used to consume less than 20 pounds of sugar per person annually. And currently, we're probably eating about 150 pounds of sugar per person per year in America. Now, I weigh just under 150 pounds. It's just, how are we doing this to ourselves? You know, type 2 diabetes is a disease of sugar metabolism. My grandmother would have known that. In the deep south, where she's from, they call type 2 diabetes sugar. They just call it sugar. They would say that that person had sugar, meaning they had sugar diabetes. So way back when, this ancestral knowledge, my grandmother's knowledge, somehow we knew then that diabetes is a disease of sugar. And somehow now, I think that folks are really confused, honestly, because this fat thing got introduced in the 80s, and many of my patients are still very concerned about consuming fats. And we should be concerned about consuming fat. My dad died of a heart attack. I don't want to screw this part up. So when I see other, coaches and things out on the internet, and believe me, we need more and more people getting enthusiastic and sharing that enthusiasm about how to lose weight and what to do, but you need to check your cholesterol, okay? This is a very individualized thing. And I think especially if you're going to be embracing the style of keto dieting that involves fat bombs and things like that, just be sure to be checking your cholesterol, because your body may not be able to tolerate that much fat. So, we take labs before and after. Ideally after 6 weeks on our program, so that we can check and see where you're at. Anyway, so food guide pyramid, evil food guide pyramid, really precipitated this weight gain. And why do we emphasize this? Because it turns out the food guide pyramid came from faulty science. It really did. Well, in the middle of the pandemic, when science is in some ways up for debate, I think it's really important to emphasize this right now, folks. I've been a nurse since, 2000. So that's over 20 years in the medical field. And I'm here to tell you, if we don't trust the science, here's what can happen. Well, the scientists that gave us the food guide pyramid, or essentially led to the development of the food guide pyramid, and I'd have to believe that our governing bodies at that time were trying to do the right thing. They noticed that, we're having a few more heart attacks. Things seem to be shifting. What's going on? And so a scientist at Harvard conducted a study trying to get to the bottom of that. Why are Americans having more heart attacks? And this was done in 1967. Now at that time, this Harvard scientist sat on the National Sugar Foundation Research Board. An ethical dilemma that would not be tolerated in our current scientific community. That would be considered, no, you can't be sitting on the Sugar Research Board and also representing an educational institution like Harvard. Well, that's what happened in the 60s. And from his research, actually the culprits looked like smoking. We all know you shouldn't smoke. Smoking was one of the major causes of more heart attacks. Well, that's kind of logical. Most people in the 60s smoked. Another major culprit was turning out to be sugar. It was, but the National Sugar Foundation Board, who funded the research, they didn't like the sounds of that, and so they kind of tabled the sugar part. And in fact, overemphasized the possible causative factor of fats. And for the next 20 years, we all got scared of fat. And ironically, we all got fat. I mean, I never used that word, but hello, obesity rates more than doubled by the cultural practices, the federal practices that overemphasize the possible dangers of fat and underemphasize the known real causes of sugar. So I'm just saying, that's science for you. If we get the science wrong, we can screw this up almost interminably. So, regardless of what you think about the vaccines, about COVID, about your own concerns. As a scientist, as a nurse, highly respected hero right here, if you want my 2 cents, get vaccinated. This is what the best scientists in the world, not just our country, in the world, have come up with. And I absolutely trust it to get us out of this crisis and get our lives somewhat back to normal. I don't enjoy wearing this around my neck all the time, okay? And if you don't want to vaccinate, this is exactly what you're going to have to do. This plus the hand washing and the social distancing. Forever. With your family, with your friends, with your work community, with your church family. It's not an either or. It's not vaccinate or just don't vaccinate and see what happens. If you don't vaccinate, sadly, you could end up being the cause of a super spreader event. You could get COVID and die when we have a vaccine that could prevent it. And I think when you look at the rest of the world where they don't even have vaccines, I live here in Hawaii, and we've had many expats from places like Thailand coming back to Hawaii so that they can qualify for a vaccine. Because in the rest of the world, it's not even an option. And so honestly, I gotta tell you, like a nurse, I think that Americans need to get over themselves and just go get vaccinated so that we can be safe, so that we can get our kids back in school, and so that nurses like myself don't drown in COVID patients or get sick themselves. Even though we're vaccinated, it's not 100%, you guys. You gotta do something. And if you want to listen to one scientist here, listen to me. Get the vaccine. You will feel way better about yourself. You're going to really kick yourself if you or someone you know gets sick with COVID right now, particularly when you had the opportunity to do something about it. Okay, there's my 2 cents on COVID. And I'm sharing it just because, this particular part, also, the science was very clear, but we didn't listen to the right science. And so I think if we don't listen to the right science again with this obesity thing, obviously things are going in the wrong direction for us. And how many more of us can we afford to have out of the working world, going on to really dangerous combinations of drugs? Let's face it. Many of you are concerned about the vaccine, maybe it's not safe. How many of you are concerned about the diseases that you might get from obesity and whether or not it's going to be safe to combine all these drugs inside your body, one for blood pressure, one for blood thinning, one for your blood sugars, one for your acid reflux, one for your knees, one for, these drugs are not studied in combination like that. But obesity tends to cause a clustering of medical problems that, we can kind of treat them a little bit with pills. We treat them way better with food, with knowing what to eat. And so that part is, for me, that's without question. The food guide pyramid started all this problem. And if you don't believe me, go watch an older movie. Go watch a Richard Pryor movie. And it's extremely eye-opening to see how thin everybody was back in the 70s. Not so anymore. Just go to your local grocery store and look around you. Most Americans are obese right now, and this is so troubling, especially for children, am I right? I think we all look at the kids these days and we got a little bit of worry in our eyes. I've got a lot because I know it's not easy for a kid to lose weight, and kids don't do the grocery shopping, okay? So ultimately our stores got bigger, all the products in there got, more complicated, and these days I think people are literally confused. We just don't know who to believe, right? And many people are trying to figure this out on their own. So start looking at the sugars, start looking at your labels, look at total carbohydrates, not simple sugars, not the only the sugars. The way we identified which foods to recommend and which ones to, recommend waiting on, we literally learned that from our patients, particularly the ones who check their blood sugars every morning. And this is a process. You could have figured it out yourself, but it's far easier for us to do it because, for one, we had a patient population that we could work this out on. Dr. Gann has been a respected cardiologist in the Tucson community for many, many years, and he was the founder of the Tucson Heart Hospital, chief of staff of Tucson Medical Center, and many, many other things throughout a long and storied career. Born and trained in Europe, by the way. And I think he's been a kind of a free thinker and a forward thinker his entire career, which is where, this made a whole lot of sense for him in retirement to invest his time and energy and resources in something that would literally help turn this crisis around for people. Hang on, helicopter. And so with those patients who knew Dr. Gann for their whole, for 30 years, he'd done their first stint, their second stint, and they trusted him. Many of them actually started doing the Atkins diet back when that was a popular diet. Ever notice we always go from one diet to the next diet? I hope the diet of hope can be your last diet. But the Atkins diet actually scared Dr. Gann. He believed that his patients were going to start having heart attacks because they're eating nothing but bacon and steak and shrimp and no vegetables. And so he actually picked up the phone and made several phone calls with Dr. Atkins. They had several conversations, I understand. And Dr. Atkins challenged him to come up with something better then, because the fact is we have a crisis on our hands and we need options. And so Dr. Gann did just that. He still believed very strongly that Atkins dieting was not safe because he believed that we needed to be eating a precise amount of protein, not just any old amount of protein, that the protein allotment needed to be adjusted and individualized. And I think this is one of the strengths of our program. I unfortunately can't teach you online how to do this for yourself. It's not an online type of thing. This needs to be done for you individually. Once you understand exactly how much protein you are supposed to eat, you're going to start feeling great. And your diseases are going to start going away. And you're going to start losing weight. And you won't be starving as you do it. That's kind of the beauty of our system. Dr. Gann also believed very strongly that it was not realistic for people to not eat vegetables. He believed that, and I do too, that, there's many things we need from vegetables. We need the fiber, we need the moisture, we need the vitamins. These are essential things. Our body kind of can't work without them. And so, I agree with him. How many people do you know who are still following the Atkins diet? Of course, almost nobody. And so little by little, with these diabetic patients, we identified which foods will raise their blood sugars a little too much, impair weight loss, raise the the blood pressure and everything. And so we had to eliminate those foods one at a time. And we came up with a list, and the list evolves. It changes. Here in Hawaii, I have a slightly different list than they have in Tucson. But we've pretty much figured out which foods can assist with weight loss, which ones we maybe need to hold off on. This took a lot of trial and error, and that's how we figured it out. So our recommendations come from the real world, not from a book, not from someone's ideas. We know that this is the stuff that works. So I can tell you confidently, yes, this, no, that. We don't feel it's safe to do it online, and this is why we've kept most of our stuff off of the internet, because as I say, we've seen our diet work so quickly for some patients. We feel it could be dangerous to, just submit the list online and say, hey, avoid all these foods. Because unfortunately, right now, many of you take medications, right? You take blood pressure pill, maybe you're on the metformin or glipizide or something for pre-diabetes or diabetes, or maybe you're on insulin. Or maybe, I don't even know that. Maybe you're supposed to be taking stuff and you're not taking it. It's really important to do this in a medically supervised format. So that one-on-one counseling is, it just doesn't work without it. In fact, during the pandemic, I tried, and in Tucson they tried to do telemedicine visits. Maybe people could just weigh themselves at home, and we can figure that out. And honestly, individually, it didn't work for them, and it didn't work for me. So I really need to see you. I drive from Hilo to Kealakekua on Fridays so that I can meet with patients in person. It's the only way it works. So that's kind of how we figured out which veggies to recommend, fruits and veggies to recommend. And I think that is enough to know. Is our diet ketosis? Yes, it is. Did we probably found that term? Yes, I think we did. When I worked at the Tucson Diet of Hope, no one said the word ketosis. It wasn't a term. You didn't go to the grocery store and see keto this and keto that. It wasn't happening. It's happening now, and I think that's because of the success of our program in Tucson. So, good for us. We started another one. We started the next Atkins diet, I think. And this, again, is where it gets so messy, and this is one of the things that really bugs me about marketing. They can take something perfectly good and screw it up for you. Because the bottom line is, unless you educate yourself right now, unless you really learn how many carbs on the label is okay, chances are you're still going to be confused. You may have some initial success and plateau and not know what to do about it. You may even start regaining, and get confused about that. Remember sleep apnea, okay? So I want to put more and more videos out like this. If you're struggling, if you're confused, if you're plateauing, if you're frustrated, if you're gaining because it's a pandemic, I'm just going to start doing it. It's been something that's, I know I need to do. I've had my own concerns about it, and I'm going to push through those barriers right now because I know that people desperately need help. So look for more videos from me, Lorraine. I'm your nurse practitioner, okay? You let me handle the food, all right? Because I know what to do. I love you guys, and I wish you all the best. Bye.